The arcades, such a very, very special time in video game history. So many of us spent countless hours with our friends, making new friends, discovering new games, graphics that we could not get at home, a sense of wonder. It's time to take a trip back to the arcade and discover the games that shaped us. Willow. The game of all games, released in 1989 by, you guessed it, the best company ever, Capcom. This arcade game was one that will always stick with me. Now, it's based on the Willow movie, of course, by George Lucas, that was directed by Ron Howard, that I think was pretty good. This was a side-scroller run-and-gun game, very much in the vein of, old-school Capcom games like Trojan, like, Ghouls and Ghosts, games like that. And I remember playing this, and this game itself was very, very rare. You couldn't just go into any arcade and find Willow. We had precisely 3 really cool arcades downtown. One of them was called Wizards 1, one of them was called Wizards 2, and then the other really big arcade was called Ace. Now, Ace was the one that was, kind of like the Creature Cantina in Star Wars.
He doesn't like you. I'm sorry.
It's the one your parents warned you about. You weren't really supposed to go in there by yourself. You'd open the double doors, and it was its own separate building. It wasn't in a mall. So you'd open the double doors of Ace, walk in, and it would be completely black, except for the lights, of course, of the monitors. I found Willow in Wizard 2, and it was always at the very, very back of the arcade. I don't remember many people talking about this one. It always interested me because very early on as a gamer, I gravitated towards Capcom. I love the art style of the games, the music, the compositions of Capcom games, just the way they felt. And you guys know what I'm talking about when I talk about that Capcom feel. You get to play as the 2 main heroes. Of course, you get to play as Willow, and you also get to play Val Kilmer's character, Mad Mardigan. Now, the arcade is quite a bit different from the home release. We did get Willow for the NES, and that was a 3/4 top-down view, kind of like The Legend of Zelda. And I always wish that we got a home port of this, but we never did. Astron Belt is a laserdisc-based video game. It's a third-person space combat on-rail shooter released in the arcades in 1983 by Sega. In North America, it was licensed to Bally Midway. This is one of those games that was just a little bit more expensive than everything else in the arcade, and I only ever found this arcade cabinet once, and it was at my local roller skating rink, Wheels Roller Skating. You see, my mom and I would go to Wheels every Saturday, and that was the family day at the roller rink. So we would go. Met a lot of really interesting people there, including my first girlfriend. Often my mom would come looking for me, as I wouldn't be on the rink skating, but I would be in the corner where the snacks are that also house the arcades. And I remember her saying to me, "Jay, you have video games at home. Why do you need to play this?" And I'd say, "Mom, look at this game. It's like Star Wars." And not taking anything away from the home video games of 1983, but this is what we had at home. This game was really, really cool because it used full motion video footage from various different sources, it looks like. The actual ship itself was graphics, and you would shoot, your ship would shoot at the screen, and if the hit was detected, the Laserdisc would switch images really quickly into an explosion screen that would give off the appearance that the ship that you had shot had been destroyed. Astron Belt will always hold a special place in my heart. Alright, who remembers Ninja Gaiden? I certainly do. I played this game so much in the arcade, almost as much as I played the NES version. This game was released in 1988 by Tecmo and is a side-scroller beat-em-up that once again is quite a bit different from the NES home version. Many a quarter was spent on Ninja Gaiden, and I'm just going to say it right now. This game series being on the NES, the arcade, the 360, wherever, is still one of the hardest game franchises of all time. Back in the day, I didn't really get too far, but there was something about the way Ryu moved. It was very fluent and just different enough that it was worth a trip downtown to the arcade to play this, even if you did have the home version. Just going through the streets, just doing ninja business, punching Jason in the face and other thugs. I especially like the Frogger part. I think it's level 2. Maybe level 1. It's where you gotta cross the street. Always found it fun. But the one thing that did separate this Tecmo Classic from the NES version is the giant sprites. This was one that was at my local variety store by my high school. So oftentimes at lunch, and even when I wasn't supposed to be at the variety store, I was there playing Ninja Gaiden. You'll find that a lot of classic video games from this era all shared one common thing, and that was that the home system wasn't quite powerful enough to replicate the arcade game. That's why this is so different from the NES version. Now later on, when we get into Genesis and Super Nintendo, that changes, but here, all the way back in 1988, it just wasn't possible on the NES. Ninja Gaiden by Tecmo, a definite classic, and one that for sure helped shape me as a gamer. Smash TV, one of the most classic twin-stick shooters of all time, created by Eugene Jarvis and Mark Turmel. This game was published by Williams and released in the arcades in 1990. This game was the spiritual successor to Robotron 2084, also co-created by Jarvis. Now, this game might be the ultimate quarter muncher of all time. I would say this or perhaps Narc. One theme that was very, very popular in the 80s, both with cinema and even imagery in music videos, was post-apocalyptic imagery. The notion that the world was going to end at any second, and whatever survivors were left had to scrounge and kind of, make their way through this new world. Well, Smash TV certainly capitalized on all those tropes, following suit with popular movies in that vein, such as RoboCop or The Running Man. You're a contestant. You or your buddy can play together, and you win big money, big prizes. I love it. You're basically running around in this studio, running and gunning down absolutely everything that moves, winning cash, VCRs, televisions, trips, all sorts of wild and wacky stuff. I mean, this game really did have it all. Smash TV was also known for something else, its ultra violence. Lots of gore in this one, my friends, and you know what? As kids, we loved it. We knew how to keep our feelings in check. We knew that this stuff was just make-believe. This was one of the first games I remember coming home that was pretty close to the arcade, and one of those very special moments in my gaming history where I really couldn't even wrap my head around the concept that I was going to be able to play Smash TV in my own home. There have been countless versions of this game released on console, including the Midway Arcade Collection for the PlayStation and Xbox. This was on the Sega Genesis, the Super Nintendo, list goes on and on and on. I remember those days getting my allowance and taking my crisp new $10 bill into the arcade, walking over to the quarterman himself and saying, "Here you go, sir, change this in." He's like, "The whole thing?" I'm like, "Absolutely." Bam, and what does he hand you? A roll of quarters. How cool did you feel? I know I felt like an absolute king. However, if you went over to this particular machine, you probably were going to go through that $10 pretty damn fast. One thing that sticks out for me with this game was going to the arcades with my pals and playing this together. The game is a blast by yourself, but it's not even close to comparing it to when you get your buddy beside you and you guys are just white-knuckling it through all the corridors trying to beat Muton Man? What the hell's his name? Mutoid Man. That's it, Mutoid Man. Once again, this is a game that shaped me as a gamer and one that we were lucky enough to get throughout the generations at home. Smash TV simply rocks. Rampage was a co-op monster building basher game that came out in 1986. Building basher? I don't know what else to call it. It was a super fun game that could have you and two of your buddies destroying cities all throughout the world. It was such an absolute blast. You got to bash in taxis, police cars, trolleys, boats, helicopters, tanks. The list goes on and on. What I really remember about this game was, once again, it was a little rarer where I was from. I didn't see it too often, but I remember just the giant cartoon sprites and how amazing it was. And, I mean, you were a bad guy, which was not very common, especially back then in gaming. You were a bad guy. You were destroying structures, stomping on people, eating them even, punching them into oblivion. Man, it was so fun as a kid. And even now, I'm so proud to say that I actually have this in my home on my Midway 1-Up arcade game cabinet. If you were to go back and ask my kid self in 1986, Jay, if you could have any single arcade cabinet in your house, what would you want? I can almost guarantee you it would have been Rampage. There are two really, really special games on this list. This is the first. This is Final Fight, released in 1989 by Capcom. Everybody knows this. As far as I'm concerned, this is the gold standard for beat-em-ups. Yes, Double Dragon is absolutely iconic. Yes, the Streets of Rage series is absolutely iconic, but this one, this is my standard. Nothing, and I mean nothing, plays or feels like Final Fight. Final Fight's a co-op game that lets you choose between three heroes. You could choose Mike Hagar, Cody, or you can pick Guy. Either way you slice it, all three characters are friggin' epic in scale. Me, myself, I always start off with Hagar, then go to Guy, and I finish the game, usually with Cody. The premise of the game is quite simple. You have to save Jessica, Mike Hagar's daughter, and Cody's girlfriend from the clutches of the Mad Gear Gang.
Oh my God!
We had a cottage about 40 minutes outside of the city I live in, and we used to go to this cottage a few times a year, and there was an arcade on the main strip of this beach. It was like this old garage. It was just the coolest thing ever. That housed so many incredible games and new game experiences for myself, one of them being Final Fight. The other very special game that I only saw in this arcade was Dragon's Lair. We'll get to that in a minute. Out of all the arcade games out there, save for maybe the Street Fighter II series, I don't think I've put more quarters in a game. Final Fight is responsible for much of my allowance and working funds going right into it. Add on top of that the incredible home versions we got both on the Super Nintendo and Sega CD back in the day. And yes, I've spent a lot on this game, but you know what? I'm totally fine with that. I can't think of a more rewarding game experience than Final Fight. I can't count how many times I've actually finished this game on all the different platforms. I really can't. It's endless. This game is a blast with a friend, but I gotta say Final Fight is also just as fun if you're playing by yourself. I could play it over and over and over and never get tired of this incredible Capcom classic. Lucky and Wild. Wow. Now this game really takes me back. This one was only housed at Ace Arcade. Remember the big arcade kind of warehouse I was telling you guys about in my city? It was so big, I really don't remember seeing it any other places. It was a co-op game, a first-person shooter / driving game. Player 1 controlled Lucky, who also controlled the car and the accelerator / brake and could shoot a bit. But the second player, now you guys know if you've played this game, the second player was where it's at, because all you had to do is shoot. This game can be played with one player, although it's a lot more difficult. It really, really shines when you and your buddy are just going at it, taking out bad guys. And who are some of the bad guys? Well, we got Jerky, Gambit, Keel, Bear, someone named Big Cigar. In all seriousness, we never did get to the end of this game. But one aspect of the game that we really, really loved, and one that kept bringing us back, was the damage. So you'd shoot your enemies down in cars or motorcycles, whatever transport they had, and their vehicles would take damage over time, so you could really see when they were almost dead. It was just completely wicked and so original. Look how chaotic this game is. This game was released in 1992 by Namco, and still to this day, one of my favorite arcade experiences of all time.
Well, that's it. Well, nice job.
X-Men the arcade game was made in 1992 by the legendary Konami. This game was just a monster, being a 6-player multiplayer co-op beat-em-up, not unlike Konami's other hits of the day. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Hang on, April.
And but there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having success and just changing the coat of paint, if you will. And that's what I felt like most of these beat 'em ups were from Konami, but they were all great. And to be completely honest, guys, I would take all 3 of these in my house as arcade units, like hands down. I would take Turtles, Simpsons, or X-Men. Back in the 90s, that was my thing, especially when Jim Lee came on the scene with his comic series about the X-Men. I was so into Marvel Comics, so into the X-Men, and this game was great. I mean, I was just at the age where I was kind of too old to play with toys, although I was still very, very interested in toys, especially the Toy Biz stuff that was coming out, the Marvel stuff. It was all so fantastic. This game came out right around the time comic book fever was hitting me and my friends, with the Infinity Gauntlet, with Todd McFarlane coming on the scene with Spawn and Image. And let's not forget the death of Superman. It was an awesome time to read comics. I've always said that video games and toys go hand in hand. Video games very much are us just playing with toys. They really are. In this game gave me an excuse to play with all of them. Cyclops, Colossus, Storm, Nightcrawler, Wolverine, Dazzler. They're all here. Of course, we all know that Wolverine is the best, but that's besides the point. This game did up the ante on Turtles and The Simpsons by having 6 players. And I'm very, very happy to say that I got to play 6 players a couple of times with some strangers, not 6 friends. There was a couple of my friends, a couple of strangers, but the 6 of us together, we were the X-Men. Dragon's Lair is an interactive film laserdisc video game developed by Advanced Microcomputer Systems and published by Cinematronics in 1983. Also, it is the first in the Dragon Lair series. The game, of course, is directed and produced by the legendary Don Bluth, and this was that second game I was talking to you about, guys. There was 2 very, very special arcade games at this cottage arcade. Dragon's Lair is the second. Alongside Final Fight, this game will hold a very, very special place in my heart forever. I'd never quite seen anything like this then or since. Dragon's Lair, after all, was an interactive cartoon. All these other silly little games like Asteroids, Donkey Kong, And even the legendary Pac-Man paled in comparison. They were mere baby games compared to what Dragon's Lair was. Right? Well, not exactly. But Dragon's Lair still has a very, very special place in video game history. You had to have Jedi-like reflexes to be able to play Dragon's Lair, and as you can see by the footage, I do not. As the player controlling Dirk the Daring, you don't really control him as much as react to what's going on with the cinematic display. There's quick flashes that tell you to go left, right, up, or down, or to use your sword, but man, you gotta be quick. There are very, very few games that I can consider being absolutely perfect. Street Fighter II Champion Edition is one of them. Those of you who were around the arcades in 1992 know the fighting game craze. We had Mortal Kombat, we had Street Fighter, those two going head to head against each other. The success of those two games alone opened the floodgates for a ton of future competitors. Of course, Street Fighter II wasn't the first fighting game on the market. It wasn't even the first Street Fighter game on the market. Who remembers, actually, in all honesty, who did play Street Fighter from 1987? Did anybody? When Street Fighter II The World Warrior came out, it was a game changer. Again, it had that classic Capcom feel in terms of graphics, incredible sound, and just the hits. The hits felt so real, they felt so good. The most money I ever spent on arcades, for sure, was the Capcom Street Fighter II series, all 5 versions of the game. The World Warrior, of course, was the first, and that one absolutely just kicked so much butt. So many countless hours in the arcade. However, it was the one that would follow. Street Fighter II Champion Edition, released in March 18th, 1992. This game would prove to be my favorite of the 5 of the Street Fighter II games. It was just that sweet balance for me. Super Turbo, just a little bit too fast. And of course, Super Street Fighter introduced us to 4 new characters, being Fei Long, Cammy, DJ, and T-Hawk. But it was in 92 when Champion Edition arrived. That was when I knew that this was the greatest arcade game of all time. We got to play the bosses, Balrog, Vega, Sagat, and Bison. That was huge. Capcom played it really, really smart. We did get a home version of Street Fighter II in 1992 for the Super Nintendo, but it was the World Warrior. It did not have the ability to play as the bosses. I've talked about it a lot in this video, where the ability to take an arcade game and play it at home via Super Nintendo, Genesis, TurboGrafx, whatever it was that we had, it was mind-blowing. And I knew we were getting closer to the arcade in terms of graphics, which was exciting, but also a very scary time. But hey, we're not there yet. So we can buy Street Fighter 2 on our Super Nintendo and we can practice. And then guess what? We can go to the arcade and play Champion Edition and learn even more. Vega for the win. There really was nothing like the arcades in the 90s. That's primarily where I spent most of my time. I was just a little too young in the 80s to go down on my own, without needing parents. So in the 90s, when I was finally in high school and able to go down with my friends, I'll never forget walking into the arcade, just hearing the Street Fighter machine, pulling out your quarters or changing your dollar bills in to get quarters, going on up to the machine, whether it be the World Warrior or Champion Edition, Turbo, Super Street Fighter, or Super Turbo, putting your quarter down on the second player and seeing a little bit of fear and excitement in the player's eyes that was already playing. You were throwing down and you were challenging him for the machine itself. This is life and death. I remember specifically the day Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition came to my town and came to my arcade of Wizard 1, going down there and just standing basically in line, because of course you were in line to play not only the new game but the winner of the machine. There was seldom a time that nobody was playing Champion Edition. Let me throw some crazy stats at you guys right now. In Japan alone, 140,000 Street Fighter 2 arcade units were sold. Each hardware unit sold for $1,300 US. The sales revenue was $182 million in the United States. Can you say game changer? This was also the beginning of something that I was a big fan of that Capcom was doing, which was building on an existing game. Instead of bringing out Street Fighter 3 or 4, etc. right away, they had the core game, which was Street Fighter 2, and they were adding to it, making different versions of the game. Oh man, Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition. I really just can't describe how much I love that game and how much that time in video game history means to me, and every single time I play it. And I'm lucky enough to have the arcade cabinet in my house. That was one that I had to have, and it was the last great push for me going to the arcades. Of course, we know how history goes. The console generations would move forward, graphics would get closer to realism, and unfortunately, the arcades in North America became less and less profitable and relevant. A special time, and with that being said, Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition will always be my #1 favorite arcade game. And these are the arcade games that shaped us.